You are listening to the Hemp Startup Journey. My name is Jason De Los Santos, co-founder of Spectrum Labs, a hemp extraction facility in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm sitting down with hemp entrepreneurs, scientists, and politicians willing to share their perspectives, lessons learned, and how we can make an impact on the hemp and cannabis industry for everyone. Hey guys, Jason here with Spectrum Labs. Just wrapped up a very exciting podcast with Michael Patterson. He's the CEO of US Cannabis Research and Development, LLC. It was really timely for me. I certainly took a lot of notes and learned a lot from Michael. As a hemp extractor, where we've been really busy, we've been fortunate to be really busy, completing a lot of extraction projects and a lot of work for white label clients. And so we've just had our head down, just doing work, grinding, looking forward to building a good company. And every once in a while, we look up and we consider, where should we go next? Are we thinking about the right direction to take our company with all the different things that are happening in the industry, from regulation to the market, supply and demand, all that kind of stuff. So this was a really insightful conversation with Michael, just because he had a lot of those insights about what he sees is happening with the hemp market and the cannabis market in the United States and also internationally. That a couple of things that he said blew my mind a little bit, because we haven't considered much of that international expansion. So Michael's bio is in the show notes, so take a look at that and ways to reach him. And I hope that you get as much as I did, because Michael had a lot to share and he's a super exciting guy, really entertaining. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Michael Patterson. Michael, welcome to the Hemp Startup Journey. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Jason, thanks you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Really looking forward to this conversation. I feel like you know a lot about a lot of different things in this industry, so I'm really excited to dig in. So because you do so many things, if you're at a networking event, when somebody asks you, "Oh, hey, Michael, nice to meet you. What do you do?" How do you answer that?
It's a great question. And so just so everybody who's listening, when I listen to podcasts, I like to have a good time. And so my pledge to you and I and Jason, we're going to have a good time, and hope you guys like that, because that's how I learn. And so people just being real. And so to answer that question, Jason, is I usually say, when they say, "What do you do?" I said, "We're the Halliburton of weed." They're like, "What does that mean?" And I say, we are the front door to the industry. So what we do is the easiest way I can explain what we do is, our whole mission statement of U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development, my company, is to move society forward through legalized cannabis. It doesn't say grow a bunch of weed and make a lot of money, because what we're finding is, if you can focus on the choke points of this industry, you can move the industry forward and you can make a lot of money. And so what we do is we go out and try to work in the areas of the choke points of the industry, some of which are banking. Banking is a huge issue right now. We work with a lot of partners who deal in the banking sector. Another is fundraising. We work with a lot of venture capital firms on looking at deals and helping them understand if this hemp deal or this cannabis deal is right. I do a lot of public speaking. I speak all over the world now at cannabis and hemp events. I just got asked to speak at an IT event. And I said, I got to tell you this. So it's IT Expo, I think, in Fort Lauderdale in February. And so they call me from LinkedIn and they're like, "Hey man, we want you to speak at our event, and it's an IT event." And I'm like, "Okay, I really don't know much about IT, but I can tell you everything you want to know about cannabis." He goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you. So we're going to do this new event. They're doing a new day where they're going to have cannabis and IT." And so I'm going to be speaking about basically the cannabis, what I call the cannabis 101. Is so what I find a lot of times, Jason, is what we do is we educate clients on what the industry is doing right now and how to potentially move forward. Some of the examples of the things we're working on, we're applying or actually raising funds to buy a medical marijuana license in the state of Florida. Why? Because we feel we need to show people what the next generation of medical cannabis support and service is going to be. I come from a heavy medical background. I'm a licensed occupational therapist. I'm a nursing home administrator. I ran a nursing home chain called Avante. It's up and down the East Coast. We did about $220 million a year in total revenues. We had a staff of over 2,500 employees. So I'm very astute in healthcare business. And so a lot of times you see in the cannabis space, the people who are going to win in the long run are focusing on wellness and they're focusing on science. So a lot of times we advise our clients when you're investing in these types of things, the value long term is going to be the medical component of this business. And so we're working on projects right now in the continent of Africa to set up biomass sales from African nations to other nations in Africa for processing. We're working on deals to get biomass, medical cannabis biomass from Africa to other countries like Australia and Israel and Canada. And so we're also involved in projects getting ready to launch a website called unitedhempstore.com. And so we're partners in that venture and that's going to be based out of the UK for people to be able to buy CBD products that are trusted, lab tested, GMP certified and approved, because our focus is we try to have our hands in everything because that's what's needed right now. Our goal is to bring perspective into this industry and to really help people and entrepreneurs and companies really understand what they're getting into, because something that we find, Jason, is this industry is literally changing right in front of our eyes. And so the people who go out and tell you they know everything about the industry, they're lying. Okay. So there's just too much to know. And so a lot of times with companies we talk to and people who want to invest and entrepreneurs who are looking to start, we always recommend you need to really look at partnerships. Partnerships are very important in this business because by the time you try to learn it all, everybody else has passed you. So you really need to find those experts in the field that can help you. And so what we do is we coordinate talent. So for example, right now we just put in a bid on a security contract for medical cannabis in a Caribbean nation. That was a request for proposal because we have security people on our team who are former CIA, former DEA, former NSA. And then we're actually just did another proposal for another Caribbean nation to do curriculum development for their medical school, their nursing school, and their pharmacy school to develop their educational curriculum, because we have people in our network who are PhDs at universities who can write curriculum. So we're assembling talent across the globe to be able to help entrepreneurs and clients and potential partnerships globally.
Okay. So if that was us in the conversation and then you would say, what do you do? I would be like, I can't top that, Michael. I can't.
I'm not trying to top it.
I can't.
My thing is, what I've learned is when I came out of this, I've been doing this now since late 2013. So almost 7 years. And so as a nursing home administrator, if you're not familiar, the nursing home industry is the most regulated and litigious in America. It's not sexy. People don't look at you and say, hey, wow, he runs nursing homes. He must be cool. So we focused on a very regulated, litigious market. And so I saw a lot of patients in our facilities who were just decimated by opiates, taking so many medications. The average medication usage for people over 65 in the U.S. is 13 drugs a day. So people are just getting tired of it. And so I've always been a cannabis fan in the fact of what it can do. And I thought it's something that needs to be pushed over the well, or whatever you want to call it, to the point where we can make it move more socially acceptable. And one of the things that I've seen is that we have to make this socially acceptable to move the needle. And so part of our goal is to put people who are professional in that light to talk. And that's one of the reasons I do so many podcasts and I do talk, is to let other people know if you're in a professional background, you need to start coming into this industry, because we're at this pinnacle in the cannabis space right now to where the early adopters, as I call them, and people might know them as the stoners or the tree huggers or whatever, those people are starting to fall by the wayside. And the reason being is everything's going corporate. Everything's publicly traded now. You're dealing with margins. That's why you're seeing the market all in flux right now. And so we're getting ready to move in the cannabis industry 2.0, which is going to require a lot different skills than cannabis industry 1.0. To put this in perspective, we have 33 states that are legal medically right now. We have 11 states that are recreationally legal. And we have over 40 countries where this is somewhat pseudo-legal depending on the stage. So we're dealing with governments who are calling our partners to say, we want to set up medical cannabis operations. How do we help? I never thought I'd be doing this stuff, dude. I mean, this is just like, it's crazy because if you start now and you start looking at a business model for this or how to get involved, you can really, really do well. And you can really change the world, because this is what's going to happen. We're from a legal aspect, we are at the beginning of everything. One of the biggest problems we have right now is international trade, because the law is so new, there's no standardization. So countries cannot do trade like grain or rice or wheat or anything like that, because they don't understand the rules per country. And then you have states, countries like the United States, where federally it's illegal, but still it's legal in 33 states. You just see what I'm saying? So the law is going to play one of the biggest factors moving forward in this business.
Yeah. So I want to get into some of the international stuff here in a few minutes, but taking a step back, I'm always curious about how people got into the hemp and cannabis industry, because I feel like there's so many different stories. So you mentioned you have a healthcare background, but just curious, what was the catalyst? Like, why did you decide to get into this business?
It's a great question. So my answer to this is Saul Broida, Saul, last name Broida. Saul Broida was a World War II veteran. He was a bomber pilot, and he suffered chronic back pain. He went on and actually got his PhD from University of Miami. And Saul, when I was a therapist years ago, he was 95 years old. This man was a World War II vet. He's a PhD in, I think it was marine biology or something. Just a brilliant man. Saw all his awards and medals and went to his house. This man was dying in pain. He was dying of opiates, and I live in Florida, and so this was in 2014, I think it was, or late 2013. And he kept saying to me, there was a lot of stuff on the news. He's like, Mike, if you can do something about this medical marijuana, I'll go to Tallahassee, I'll testify. And this man weighed 100 pounds, sopping wet. I mean, he was actively dying. There's actually a term called actively dying. And so he was getting killed by pneumonia, and he was on opiates. He couldn't eat. And so, I just lost it. I was like, somebody needs to stand up for people like this. And so to me, I've been in senior living all my life. And I remember telling myself, nobody's going to sit there and risk their career and everything to do this right now. So unless I do something, then nobody else is going to follow. So that's how I got started. And from there, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had a ton of contacts. I used to work for a private merchant bank called Strategic Capital out of Miami. So I knew the venture capital game, and we worked with a lot of Indian tribes. So our first consult was with an Indian tribe out in Washington State. It's called the Colville Nation. And so they were interested in doing hemp. So we went out there and talked to them about the current situation of hemp, current situation of medical cannabis, because they're in Washington State. It technically was legal, but yet the tribes didn't believe in it. So we went out there and consulted with them on what are the laws? What are the rules? Where is this going as an industry? What are the legal ramifications? Can we make money? These are the basic questions people are getting at. And so if you can provide those questions to your clients, they are going to stay with you. The new law firms in this industry are going to be successful when they bring in diverse talent. And you and I talked about this offline is, look to hire a cultivator, look to hire somebody who has healthcare backgrounds, who's a compliance auditor, somebody who's good in GMP certification. Why? Because then, one, if I'm billing them, I can bill them for more hours. And then two, you're providing more of a service. If I can come to you and get all my legal and operational insight and be able to use you throughout my operation, and I don't have to go do it myself, I'm all about it, because then I can move faster. If you have a whole list of people that have worked in France and France becomes legal, and you can go to your clients and say, hey, I got all these lawyers in France right now. We can work on all your projects. You're going to do well, because companies are willing to start paying for that type of knowledge. One of the other things that I personally do is I do a lot of consulting through a group called Gerson Lehrman Group, GLG. And so they set up these consulting phone calls with companies all over the world. And so when I started in 2013 with cannabis and hemp, I did maybe 2 calls a year. Last year, I did 80 calls. And this year, I'm going to do over 120 calls. So what you're finding is it's really starting to pick up globally. Thailand just legalized. And when Thailand legalizes, that's your open door to Asia. Right now, what we're starting to see is it's starting to be a jobs grab and an economic development grab for countries. So now we're moving past the social mores and we're moving into business. And that's exciting. So now, I mean, it's still dangerous. I mean, in Thailand, you get caught in the wrong place, you can go to prison for a long time with cannabis. So it's still real touch and go. We're actually working with a country in Africa right now who it's technically not legal. The group we're working with got a provisional license. And so they're waiting for the final license. But if you get caught there with like a gram, I think, of cannabis, you can go to prison for 10 years. So it's really,
Wow.
you really have to, the change in the law is going to be profound. And one of the things, if I can offer advice, is when you start going into new markets, especially if you're looking to go global or even in a new state, what you find is you go through this social progression, if I could call it. So I call it the prohibition hangover. Okay. So you go into these states and you go into these countries and you literally do the same talk every year, the same talk of every other state that legalizes. You have to go through, your world's not going to end. The sky's not going to fall. Your property values aren't going to plummet. You don't want to sit there and dispensaries in a neighborhood actually increase property values and crime goes down. That's what the studies have shown. And so you really have to dispel all the myths and really try to counteract the 80 years of negative propaganda on this plant before you can even have a conversation. So the way to do that is specifically as a lawyer is to roll up in there and say, look, I've been in the law for X amount of years. And you basically, when you're talking to city council members and people in these states, you got to say, look, I know what I'm talking about. I have experts on my team. We deal with this on a so-and-so basis. I've been in your community, or I have some sort of relevance to this community in some way, shape, or form, and really put their mind at ease. And so something that we've done, my company's done, and me personally, is I went out to Oklahoma before they had their constitutional amendment vote in 2018. And so I went out there, got on TV, got on podcasts before they voted to literally say that, to say, look, sky's not going to fall, world's not going to end. It's not perfect. The way you have your constitutional amendment, you're going to have problems, but you kind of need to start doing it, because if you don't do it now, then when? You're going to do it when you're state 47 and there's no jobs left and everything's going to go out to other states? Or are you going to sit there and make a name for yourself in cannabis? This is a business now. And so I literally start talking to them like, you need to start thinking more than just, is this morally right? You need to think about, how can this industry protect my community? And how can I make, if I'm a businessman, how can I make money on it? And how can I bring value? And that's what I see, is you got to find a way to bring value. And as attorneys, you have a lot of value. You just need to make sure you understand the law portion, because people are going to be leaning on you to know that. And you want to know what you're talking about. I won't say where I was speaking at a conference, and this law firm got up and they started, I would just tell you, it was in a room of very, very educated people. And so this law firm gets up there and they start talking about how they know the law and how they're great and how they're awesome. Well, then they start regurgitating law from 3 years ago, and the room let them have it. I mean, they basically showed their colors, and they tried to go up there to say, hey, we know everything. And this very, very professional crowd was not having any of it. And they almost got booed off the stage. So if you're going to go up there, you better know your stuff, because you expect to be challenged. Yeah. And so it's funny, because I have a lot of lawyers who talk to me and they're like, you sound like you're a lawyer. Are you a lawyer? I was like, my answer is no. I've just been sued a lot.
You have enough experience.
Well, I ran nursing homes. Awesome. We were sued all the time. And we had 8 suits at any given time. And so what I learned is I learned all about risk, and I learned all about defense. And so every time I go into a situation operationally, I always look at what is our weakest link and how do we fix that link before it becomes a problem. Because remember, if you don't fix those weak links in the nursing home business, you're going to get sued for deaths. You're going to get sued for problems. And so taking that mindset into cannabis, excuse me, I'm very open to people looking to do investments. I'm very open to try to help people with their business plans, because we find that if you're successful, then that means we're moving the businesses forward, and legalization will push forward, because I call myself an economic activist. I'm not going to go hold up the signs, but I'm going to work within the system to make sure that the right companies succeed, and we do this the right way, because that's the way we're going to change the law. We're going to do it through money, and we're going to do it through public action and things for the betterment of society. We're not going to do it. My point is, the advocates got us to this point. It's time for you and me and other people to step up and show and take that baton into Cannabis 2.0 and use our skills to change the world. All the advocates already did their job, and to me, they're sitting back saying, okay, we're passing the baton. You need to take it on. And so it's up to people like us to sit there and step up and really use our skills to move this forward, because I have so many people who come to me and are like, yeah, I hate my job and I hate this and I hate that. Well, then do something about it. Look at what you want to do. And I got to tell you right now, I've been doing this 7 years. And so I just love what I do. I mean, working in the nursing homes, you could see your life passing in front of you 20 years ahead of time, because you're doing the same thing. I talk to the people in the industry now. They're like, "Oh, get me out of here. Oh my gosh." You're dealing with healthcare, and it's more with less and more with less. So anyway, I kind of rambled on there, but that's kind of the overview of how I got into this and why I do what I do.
Yeah. You mentioned international, but before we go international, let's talk about the U.S. market. We spoke briefly a few days ago. You had a few things going on, like just wherever you want to start. Like, what are some of the, let's say, the top 2 or 3 challenges that you're seeing in the hemp or cannabis market in the U.S.?
Consistency of regulation. So that's the biggest problem that I see. So if I'm a hemp farmer or I'm a processor, okay? So the processor, let me give you a perfect example. So what we're seeing is some of the state law are coming into some sort of standardization when it comes to laboratories. So now we just had the report from the USDA, which came out recently, that said you have to lab test your samples at a DEA Schedule 1 lab. Well, now all these laboratories are running around saying, well, how do we meet this requirement? Because let me tell you, the DEA is not handing out Schedule 1 laboratory licenses very easily. So you're left scrambling. So that deals with regulation. Also, if I'm a processor or I'm a grower, then I got to figure out, well, what is the law about moving it across state lines? Yes, it's supposed to be legal, but we all know there's been cases where trailerfuls of hemp have been seized. There was one in New York a few weeks ago, a couple in Oklahoma and in Idaho. And so that regulation is going to be very, very difficult. Another thing is oversupply. As we're talking now, the price for biomass is plummeting. To me, processing is staying somewhat stable because there's not as many processors. You can't just roll out and open up a processing plant overnight. So with the amount of product, I think we're going to go through a lot of carnage over the next year or two of people trying to figure out what their niche is. Why did I get into this? I heard that I can make money hand over fist, and this is not happening. I think there's going to be a lot of things where a lot of business plans were going to fail. And the ones that are the most thought out and the most well-funded, I think, will succeed.
Do you think, I keep hearing folks saying that from the cultivator side, that because the prices are so low right now for biomass or even for flower for some folks, that they are storing and will be holding off until the springtime? Have you been hearing that?
I have, but then I go into, okay, you mean to tell me that you've already made arrangements to store all your all your hemp ahead of time, and you're going to put it in cold storage or humidity storage or whatever you're going to do? That's great. But I just don't think that's a reality from the people that I see getting into this industry. Right now, let's put it in perspective. In 2018, we grew 80,000 acres of hemp in the United States. This year, we grew 500,000. So I've heard from experts to say about half of that is going to be either crop failure, it's going to rot, or it never actually comes to market because people don't know what they're doing. How do you go from 80,000 acres to 500,000 acres in a year and expect everybody to be successful? So I think, if they can store it, that's great. And I think the prices will come back. But next year is going to be even worse because I live in the state of Florida. And right now they haven't passed the law yet to grow hemp. And I already know there's going to be at least probably the first year, at least 30 to 40,000 acres planted in Florida. And so far, the only test plots they've done through the University of Florida have all failed. They did it three areas of growing it around the state. So you plant, say, 30,000 acres, 40,000 acres in Florida in 2020 in the fall, in the winter and spring, then how much of that is actually going to get to processing? And right now, officially, there's no processing plants in Florida. So I know there's a lot of people looking into that. We're one of the groups who are working on that as well. So we know there's going to be a market, but I tell people if you want to stay in this business, you got to plan ahead, and 2, you got to diversify. And so when I'm looking at processing, you make sure you have to have specialty formulations. Specialty formulations are the future because anybody can just throw out a product with a certain percentage of CBD. But if I can throw out a product that has a certain percentage of CBD and THCV and CBG, because all these technologies are going to have to evolve over time. Also, another thing with the processors that I see is you have to diversify in what you're processing. So all these farmers who are getting killed on CBD, processing for CBD hemp, they're going to have to start moving over into fiber. If they're smart, they'll start moving next harvest because there's not a lot of hemp processing plants that can do fiber. So where we see fiber going is going to go into clothing the way Tesla went into electric cars. So let me give you an example. So when Tesla came out with their cars, did they start with the base model? No. They started with the Rockstar model, the most expensive model, because they wanted people to think of this as stature and this is, exclusivity and so forth and so on. Well, what we're starting to see in fashion is higher end brands. Louis Vuitton, Levi's is starting to come out with a high end brand of hemp/cotton jean. They're trying to make hemp clothing cool and fashionable. And I think that will start to take off in the United States because hemp grows in about 4 months. Cotton has to take 8 months to grow. So if I can grow 2 crops of hemp for every one of cotton and use 75 to 80% less insecticides, herbicides, and fertilizer, well, then that may make financial sense. So that's where we see that hemp is going to play a role. CBD is going to play a role for a little while. It will always play a role, but you need to be able to diversify into hemp polymers, hemp plastics, hemp clothing, hemp building materials, because if you're processing hemp as a processor, as long as you can evolve with the industry, you'll always be open.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that let's say as a processor, so you're extracting CBD and some of the other cannabinoids, and I'm just thinking some folks listening out there and saying like, man, I already spent a bunch of money on this equipment to extract. Like, how do I even start to get into fiber and some of these other textile options for hemp? Like, where do you start?
That's a great question. And so don't quit everything. It's just saying you need to start looking ahead. So keep working through your machinery. And I always tell people, if you can get a long-term lease on that machinery to get more cash flow, it's better. And start educating yourself on the fiber industry. Because to me, the fiber industry, there's a machine called a decorticator, and it's well-known technology that can make this, but just not a lot of companies have done it to the hemp, using hemp fiber as a decorticator, because everybody want to make money on CBD. So if you have a very limited amount of crop that you can grow, you're going to grow it for the highest dollar amount. So hemp plants that genetics for good CBD, which is the big buds, they have the oil, and then the hemp for fiber grows more with a stalk. So it looks more like bamboo, grows about 16 feet tall, very tight, like whether it be a bamboo farm, and then they cut all that down to make the fiber. So I think that's where they can start educating themselves. Also, they can start talking to farmers who are currently growing it, start educating about how it's grown, how it's differently, and then what kind of machinery you need to look into purchasing. To give you an example, a decorticator will probably run between $250,000 and $300,000 to $400,000. And so I tell people, look, if you're going to look to get into it, then go to other places that currently have it. If it's a company you're in Georgia and the company's in Idaho, offer to fly out there and take them to lunch and see if they'll show you the industry and explain to what they're doing out there. Because a lot of times people are interested in growing and diversifying. And so if you can go out and be the bigger person and go out there and say, hey, can I learn from you? And can I'll be more than happy to give you what I know, and I'll take you to lunch. And I got to tell you, that's how I got a job offer from a major California cannabis firm and back in 2013. So, I mean, I wanted to learn, and I called this world famous place, and I called and said, hey, I just wanted to tour and come out there and learn. And he met me. He's like, well, let's meet at a Starbucks. I'm like, okay. So I meet at a Starbucks, and they're way out west, and I'm in Florida. And I just started talking about my vision for the industry and what I see. And he literally, he said, well, I want you to create a job position for yourself for you to come us to manage the East Coast operations, because we're looking for people like you. So it turned out it just wasn't a good fit. But the point is by just doing that and being curious and be willing to go out there and try something new, I got a job offer out of nowhere that I never thought I would get. So as you learn,
sure, you weren't even looking for that.
I wasn't even looking for it, and it got me thinking. And so what I find is, what on my path is, it's just been a very rocky path. It's not easy. You have to be very self-motivated, especially as processing. You need to be able to get your product out. The new market is going to definitely be Europe, because we're getting ready to have a glut of oil or processed materials, however you want to call it. And we have a higher standard here than they do in Europe. And so we're going to be able to get still pretty good pricing over there. And we have a higher quality than what they have in Europe. So that's where I see the big leader on the processing side. I think it's where you start looking for new markets that are opening up. Because remember, CBD is 100% legal, theoretically. So you need to start looking into these new markets, because other countries will follow suit and be able to import those products. So for example, in the UK, about 70 to 80% of all CBD consumed is bought online. So, because there's not many stores right now. So the online market in Europe is exploding in growth. And so people are looking for very good quality American brands, and they're looking for compliant brands, meaning you have to have third-party testing and you have to be GMP or good manufacturing practice approved. And if you're not, and some places require EU or European Union good manufacturing practices. So if you're not don't have that GMP certification, you need to get it, because the first question that I get for people looking for product is, we can't accept anything that's not GMP compliant. So you don't even get a seat at the table. So you got to get out there and start working on that. And so that's stuff that we do, and we help clients get GMP approved because we have connections all over the world who make that happen, not just for the cannabis space, but most of them came out of pharmaceuticals.
Gotcha. Now, do you think that consumers know what that is? When you see on the little supplement bottles, or of course some of the CBD companies or whatnot, and they have GMP and they have, they say quality and all that kind of stuff. Do consumers know, like, what on that quality front? I know that people are looking for that sort of transparency of, they want to know that what they're buying, what's in the bottle is safe and healthy and is going to help them. But on that safety or quality side, what are they looking for?
You know what they're looking for? They're looking for a product that what it says it is what's in the bottle. And so to me as a processor, if I'm smart, I'm going to go out and say, you know what? I'm going to sell. I tell people all this. You're not selling product, you're selling trust. Whoever sells trust best is going to win. Mm-hmm. So figure out your business plan. How do you sell trust? Do you do it through words? Do you do it through the ability to check your lab reports on your QR code? Do you do it through education? What makes you different? Why should somebody buy your product? Because you can't say it cures cancer or anything else. So you have to talk about your purity, right. And I think it's up to the providers or the people who have the product is to do the education. Because the way I look at this is, you can brand yourself as education. You could go out and run with it, and everybody may have to have lab testing. But if you say we're 100% lab tested, 99% accuracy, well, if people come back and in the industry say, well, everything's 99% accurate. Well, it doesn't matter. They think you're 99. You're the best because you claimed it, because nobody else thought of it. So we see that example all the time through marketing. And so a lot of it is, you have the ability to shape your market. But I always remind people in the hemp, CBD, and oils businesses, you got to sell trust. You got to figure out the best way to do that. And most of that is through compliance, because if you can gain their trust, you can sell them anything.
I don't remember the exact story, but there was something about Schlitz back in the, I don't know, like 50s or 60s, the beer, which is extremely tasty for only for college students probably. But they were touring around a marketing guy in their brewery, and he was just inquiring like, oh, like, what do you guys do? Like, let me just see, how you process how you create your beers, so that we can see if we can extract something that we can tell the consumer. And the site manager showed him something. I forget exactly what it was, but the marketing guy was just astounded. He's like, "Oh my God, like that sounds incredible. I didn't even know that you guys did that." And the site manager said like, "Oh, well, everybody does that. Like it's not a big deal." But he's like, "But who talks about that? Like, which other beer companies mention that?" He's like, "Oh, well, probably nobody, because we all do it." And so that eventually led to the rise of Schlitz back in those decades, just because they were saying, here's what we do, sensationalizing it and making it seem like they were the only ones, but they were all doing it. They were just selling that idea, not necessarily that they were different. They were just better at selling that feature.
Right. It's like everybody has to follow the same rule. But if you own that rule and say, this is what we do, then somebody else comes out after you, then it's like, oh, well, they were the first. And that, to me, what I call is a term that I coined called imprinting. And so imprinting is like when a baby duck is born and the first thing they see is their mother. Okay. Well, if you imprint on a customer that you're the best on the planet, and there's not a lot of other brands out there who can say otherwise, then people are going to believe you. So a lot of times, when you go out and talk with authority in this industry, a lot of people you're not going to meet a guy who was in the hemp and CBD business 20 years ago. You're not going to meet an executive who's been doing this for 12 years and knows everything. So if you come out of the gates and you have a lot of knowledge, then you're going to get respected. And so that way you can use that to your advantage when you're talking to patients. But the big thing I see in the processing game right now is, it depends on which direction you want to go. You want to do all white label? That's great. So if you're going to build white label, you still have to sell trust because you want them to buy your white label product. And then if you're going to sell brand products, it's a whole different conversation. Because to me, I think, people always ask me, well, do brands matter and will brands be relevant? And my short answer is yes, brands will always be relevant. Which brands can we point to today that are going to be $1 billion in the future? Probably most of the stuff that's out there right now will not be there in the future because it'll either get gobbled up by another company or there's going to be a new product that comes out. And I always use the Netscape example. So for those of you who are old enough and remember the internet, when the internet started, we didn't have Microsoft Windows. And so literally you couldn't do much of anything on a computer. And so this company called Netscape came out and was the first, not a server, but it was a software. It was a system to get on the internet. Okay, there we go.
It's a browser.
Thank you. It was a browser. So it's the first browser literally ever invented that got mass appeal. They came out of the gates and they killed it. They made all this money and they were huge. Well, then Microsoft got mad at them and then they took them down through legal channels and just made a better product. And then Microsoft won and they went bankrupt. So that's where Microsoft won. So just because you have leaders today doesn't mean they're going to be leaders in 2 years. And so what we're finding, and you're seeing this in the cannabis markets, of people who follow the cannabis markets right now, you're finding all these early guys who jumped out of the gates who were in it for 2 to 5 years. It's showing. They weren't building a corporation with a strong foundation. You got these guys like in MedMen, the company, the publicly traded company, where they've lost 90% of their 95% of their value in the last year. And a lot of it is because they grew too fast. They're in 13 states, and they had a big deal with PharmaCann that fell apart because the value of the stock pummeled, and that's in medical cannabis. But you're going to see a lot of the same things in hemp and hemp processing because the values right now are just insane of purchasing these companies and refis and valuations, and so those are going to be tempered. And so don't plan your business on a $50 million valuation, which you could probably get right now as a processor. Plan your business on a $10 million valuation or less. So that way you're bringing value to your investors. And also you're preparing as a company of a $10 million valuation and you pay everybody accordingly. Because the biggest thing we're winning is you got to have enough cash to get to the finals and get at least, or even the starting line, because we all know there's a lot of upfront cost. And so you really have to think out your vision, because if you make a business for today's market, you're not gonna think ahead. You're gonna be behind already.
Michael, let me ask you, I usually like to take a look at history just to see if there are any sort of echoes of what we're going through at the moment. Do you have any examples of that? Like anything anywhere else that you've seen, maybe not as extreme of a sort of Wild West that we're experiencing right now, but any other period of time where we've had this sort of rush to create this industry and, not a lot of regulation and people trying to come out of the gate flying, but not really creating a solid foundation, and, anything that we can extract from that example?
Well, it's a good question. There's two kind of examples. There's nothing exactly like this, but when we came out of prohibition for alcohol back in the 30s, a lot of people are like, oh, we've done this before. We came out of prohibition with alcohol. I'm like, well, not really, because remember, that industry was up and running for like 60 years ahead before then. So when they turned on the faucet again, all the big companies stayed in business. Anheuser-Busch, Schlitz, all those guys, they just made different stuff, made water, soda, all that type of stuff. And they probably sold a lot of illegal booze. So they still had standards and they still had regulations. One of the things is actually comparable for the hemp and CBD is after World War II, a lot of Americans came home and grew a lot of crops. And so I think one of the crops is wheat. That's how you make, is it whiskey or bourbon or one of the two? Whatever crop that makes bourbon. Well, what happened was Europe was decimated. So Europe had no food and anything. So a lot of that food was being sent over to Europe. But the U.S. grew so much, the wheat market tanked. So it was so cheap. And so what happened was they used that wheat to make alcohol, to make bourbon, and they sent it over to Europe, and they figured out another way to make money on it because the prices tanked so much. So they had to be innovative and ingenious in how they used that crop. And so they came up with bourbon, and that's why bourbon is big in Europe today. I did not know that. I was told, was a guy who told me that story. So it makes a lot of sense. So with that, to me, that's where we are right now. The prices are going to plummet with hemp. What can you do with hemp that is not being done? And I mentioned before, doing fiber, doing polymers, doing plastics. Start to figure out where the bottlenecks are going to be. As we move forward in society, there's going to be a bigger push to do with more natural fibers and things that are better for the environment. Growing cotton uses a ton of pesticides. So hemp literally uses zero. Cotton is, like I said, an eighth month growing cycle, and hemp is only 4 months. So, the thing is moving in that direction. And so figure out what the next big thing is going to be in hemp. And so what I see is all the uses that we don't have now. Imagine if you get a contract with BMW to do plastic doors, do hemp doors, or you get a hemp concrete contract or a hemp drywall contract, and you're making drywall for homes, because everything's going to switch. Here in Florida, we had a whole big problem, a thing called Chinese drywall. And this was about 10 years ago. And all these homes had all these drywall that was made in China, had all these chemicals in it. And what they found is the air quality in the home was at disastrous levels. Like, people were getting sick, and you had to literally rip out the whole inside of the house, and it was a nightmare. So using natural products, I think everything's going back to the future. Everything's going back to homemade, back to organic, back to natural. But the challenge is we need to do it on an industrial level. Well, that's where hemp allows you to do that. It allows us to build building materials like crazy made of hemp, because we'll have plenty of acreage to do it. So that's where I see the future going. One of the things I did see the other day was these 3D houses. How you have this machine, and it comes on site, and it literally prints your house out in a day. Yeah. And so we're finding that is something I think with hemp concrete is going to be massive for these pre-made houses, because they can build them for, say, $10,000 for a 1,000 square foot home in a day. And so with our housing crisis around the world, this could be something that could be eco-friendly. You can do it very quickly, and you can pump out a lot of houses in a short amount of time. So hemp plays a major role at that table. And so if you're the type of processor who has the vision to start looking at these technologies now, I'm not saying change your whole business model, but start investing in time and education and start seeing what's coming ahead so you can be prepared.
But the image that I got when you were talking about the printing and making it home in the day was the Jetsons.
Right.
Do you remember that show?
Mm-hmm. And that's what the future is going to be.
I think it was in the intro. Yeah, I think it was in the intro where they would show homes being built in 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. That's where we're going.
Right. And so hemp plays a big role in that. And so if you can be the hemp processor who can process that much equipment, because what I see happening in the hemp game is kind of what happened in the citrus industry in the state of Florida. So if you're not familiar, Florida is really, really big in citrus for years. And recently we've had a blight that's been a condition called greening. It's some sort of bacteria that kills the fruit. It's kind of like a cancer, and they can't cure it. But before that became an issue 20 years ago, citrus farms were everywhere here in the state of Florida, and they only had a certain amount of processing. Well, over time, the levels of citrus stabilized and the market stabilized. So the market was would change a little bit every year, but it wasn't drastic. So I see over time that happening in hemp, but it's going to take about 5 to 6 years to really start getting to that happy medium of supply and demand, because the market's still just trying to figure itself out right now. And so we have to, as an investor or as a business person, you really have to start accounting for the unknowns. And so in this business, I say it's usually 30% of your business needs to be focused on the unknowns and the future, because your business is going to change over time. If you are a company, and I tell people all this all the time, if you're a company that has CBD in your name, your days are numbered, because when a new cannabinoid comes along, what are you going to call yourself then? World's best CBG and world's best TCHA. So think about that moving forward. The cannabinoids coming down the pike, if you're a processor, you should be able to extract all of them. And again, that's where your value is. Look at the kilogram price of CBG compared to CBD. It's astronomical. And then THCV and THCA. And so that's where I see the huge value chain taking hold.
It's kind of like those stores. What is it, like Tires and More?
Right.
It's like you have to kind of guess to see what else they do.
Right. Or Tires Plus or things like that.
So let's take a So let's take a trip overseas. So what should we know about international CBD hemp production?
They need processors. They need knowledge. They have money, but they don't have the knowledge. So I tell people a lot of times we get approached. We're working on a deal right now to get a pharmaceutical Schedule 1, basically DEA license in a country in Africa. I already know I've got 3 or 4 processors I'm going to reach out to because I'm like, okay, this is going to be a major job, $750,000 job. I'm going to need people on site for X amount of months. I need people I can trust. And so those are the companies I'm going to go to who have the bankroll themselves to be able to do a $750 million job and do it right and do it on time and do it on schedule. So I'm looking, I know I'm just one of many companies who are looking for people who can do that. So what I see is the companies or processors, they really need to start thinking about overseas shipments, because start talking with people overseas now. Start building relationships now with people you can trust. Go to conferences overseas. For example, I'm lucky enough, I'm speaking in New Zealand at the New Zealand's first medical cannabis conference ever. It's going to be in March 2020. And I looked at the speaker list, and I'm the only American there as of right now. So I'm going into these markets. And so any American companies that I know are good, I can sit there and we can work together, because I tell people, look at me as a general contractor. I'm going into these markets. I'm speaking in 9 countries next year. I'm going to all these new markets and having all these tons of leads for all these types of services. I need financing. I need funding. I need equipment. I need compliance. I need this. I need that. And so we come in and say, okay, we're going to work through our partners to give you this, and this. And so we can coordinate these with major groups in Europe, Africa, Asia, because those are the new markets. And so we need to use our skills as Americans to go over there and help these groups. So the growth is going to be massive in the U.S., but companies in the U.S. who can really think outside the box and start advertising themselves overseas will do very well, because you're going into a new sandbox and there's not a lot of players. So again, if you can imprint in South Africa or imprint in other countries that you're the best from the U.S., then you can really, really do well.
And then is this producing in the States and somehow shipping overseas, or is it implanting yourself in that foreign country to extract and sell?
I think it's both. I think what you do is there's a lot of countries that are opening up the regulation to where they'll allow CBD imports. Well, you need to know that, and you need to have the groups already ready to go. So when that does happen, you can start importing via your current supplier in Europe, that you can already get your product into those countries. Because if you can come in first, then you can make a ton of money, and you can start branding from day one in a whole new culture. So whether you go to Poland or Czechoslovakia or Macedonia, I mean, people don't think about those countries, but remember, if you can sell them 10,000 bottles of your product a month, those are sales, and they're going to be at a high rate, because remember, they're using euros. The euro right now is about $1.20 US. So if I can sell products at the same price and make a little bit better margins, the people in Europe think it's cheap. So you get a better quality product at a cheaper price. That's what the American product is going to be. And so tapping into those markets and making those connections now are going to help you over the next 3 to 5 years. And then also that's on the supply side. If it's the operational side, if you know how to run these, that's a huge skill, because all these people overseas need training, and they need to be able to have equipment, and the newest equipment, because the future is I can be a processing company in Missouri, and I can sit there and monitor all my machinery from all over the world via cameras now. So I can monitor all these places in these different countries by having people in the States. So when you use technology to identify problems, and then you don't have to go overseas as much, and you train people overseas to do things. And with technology, you can fix them remotely, and you don't have to physically be there as much.
Interesting, almost like drone operators of sorts.
This is the future.
Communication.
That's a perfect example. So, Jason, this is the future. The future is a hemp farmer in Missouri gets up and he goes to his computer and he puts on his virtual reality glasses, and then he takes control of a drone in Thailand. And so he picks it up, and now he's in control of a drone in Thailand, and he flies around the hemp field, and he looks at the hemp field and makes sure it's okay, and he waves and talks to the employees via the drone. Hey, how y'all doing? And they says it, and they automatically translate it into Taiwanese or Thailandese, and what are they, Thai. And then he lands the drone, and then what he does for investors, he's like, hey, you want to see our operation in Thailand or our operation in India? And they do the same thing. And the investor sits down with their virtual reality glasses, and they fly around the actual grow in real time and see it. That's where we're going. So that's how you have to think. And so if you can manage these operations overseas from sitting on your couch or in your office in Iowa or Ohio or wherever you are, in Georgia, what have you. So that is what the future is. And it's working smarter, not harder, because that way you can do more in a short amount of time. And then you don't have to physically be there all the time, and you can monitor what's going on.
Very interesting. That sounds super exciting. I think, thinking about international, it's at the same time, it sounds complex and overwhelming almost. Like, where do you even, like, I would assume, obviously, talking to somebody like you, but generally, where do you start thinking about, okay, well, maybe I should look at Africa or, Denmark or whatever. Where do you start?
You start at conferences. That's what I tell everybody. Go to conferences, interact with people. That's why you pay to go to conferences. The conferences in Europe, they're about 3 years behind the US. So like I was lucky enough to speak. I spoke this summer in London at the first London CBD Expo. And so it was probably about 1,000, 2,000 people there. And it's a great list of speakers. But that could have been a show in Nashville, or it could have been a show in Louisville. And it probably would have gotten the same response. And London is a city of 8 or 9 million people or something. So what we're seeing is the cannabis industry and the hemp industry 5 years ago was kind of nascent. And now they've gone through this massive growth in less than a year. So, I mean, like last year, this 2019, I spoke in 4 countries. Next year, I'm speaking in 9 because I went over there and I went to conferences and I met a lot of people. And so they said, well, why don't you come speak here? We need this. We don't understand this. Can you please help us? And so as a processor, I go to the shows in London. I go to the show in Dublin, whatever country you want to operate in, just go meet people. Everybody at these shows that typically go, most people are in the business. For example, I was again, lucky enough to be part of a judge of a competition called the World CBD Awards, where there was actual objective grading through lab testing and independent judging panels to pick the best products in the world. And so it was in Barcelona, Spain in July of 2019. And so I went and I met, there was about 500 people there, and they were all business to business, very high level people who needed help from the US, who needed processors, who needed people who knew knowledge. Because what we're seeing right now, Jason, is overseas, you got a lot of businessmen who want to get into the game, but they have nobody they can go to who understands the business. So if you can go over and understand the business and talk about these processors, you have a lot of knowledge they don't have. I mean, I deal with people who are PhDs in molecular biology, but they don't understand hemp processing because they've never done it. To me, it's more of an art right now than a science. It's moving towards a science, but the art is always going to be there. And so having that knowledge of the years that has been done here by some companies is use that knowledge and take it around the world now, because globally, the market is very, very small. And I kind of use the analogy of the global market of influencers in this business globally can fill probably like a big high school basketball stadium. In another 2 years, it's going to not be able to fill the Michigan football stadium of 102,000 people. It's just going to grow so fast. So if you can get in now and meet people now, then you can meet the movers and shakers, which you can become one in the next 2 to 3 years because you're that much farther ahead. A lot of people look to take the easy way out and go locally. Well, in the States, you could do that, but think about how many people are coming behind you, getting ready to do the same thing you're doing right now. They're going to drive your prices down so low. So if you go ahead and tap into Europe now, when the market crashes here, you're still selling it for the same amount you're selling it for now, 2 years from now. And that's success because the price is going to go down globally. So start really thinking about these other markets, learning about them, go to these shows. If you don't know anybody, you can call our company. We can work through different companies and we can use you as a resource. The way we typically operate, we operate as a general contractor. So companies come to me and say, hey, I do this, that, and this other. And then they tell me, I explain what the job is. And then they send me a bid, and then we submit it as a total package to the client. Just like if we're building a huge hotel or building something else big, we become the general contractor. We manage that project. We manage all the subs. So there could be a financing sub. There could be an operational sub. There could be an education sub. There could be a processing sub. There could be a hemp cultivation expert sub. And what we do is we coordinate all that. The legal team will coordinate all that. And so we like to deal with companies in the U.S. who are very knowledgeable and have the ability through working with us to go global global and can really back up what they do on a large scale, because that's where the industry is going. This massive industrialization has not happened overseas. So the big market's going to be coming in and doing these massive processing of, hundreds of liters a day, 200, 300, 400, 500 liters a day are coming, because CBD and these products are going to be industrial scale. You're going to be having as an additive in everything under the sun at rock bottom prices, because these other countries in Asia and around the equator are going to be growing biomass cheaper than we can do it in the US. So how do you compete? You get out now with the technology, the IP, and your knowledge of the specific formulations. That's how you win this game, because you're not going to be able to compete on biomass sales of hemp with countries like Namibia and Malawi, where they're doing it for less than 1 cent a pound. You know what I'm saying? It's just rock bottom prices you'll never be able to beat. So use your science, use technology to your advantage, to where you can go over there. You can help these people, and you can open processing plants over there, and you can be inside the game and be inside that business, because that'll bring you more opportunity. It may sound a little daunting, but what's more daunting? Being in a business that you're a dinosaur in 2 years, or thinking ahead and being able to be in the game still in 2 years and not owe all your investors debt, and look at them in the face and say, I wish I could have done something else. Or I wish I would have listened to that guy who kept rambling on about Europe on that podcast with Jason De Los Santos. I'm saying? So to me I'm trying to help. I'm saying, look, let's get out there and let's start helping these countries, and you can help others and do a great thing and make good money.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about some personal stuff with your circle of, let's say, friends or family. I'm just curious. What are your people's perspective? Like, when you went from a pretty conservative industry, right? Healthcare, senior living, those kinds of things. And all of a sudden you go into hemp, and, did people look at you like you had 3 heads? Like, were folks saying like, oh,
how they looked at me? They looked at me like I was going to steal their kids. I mean, it was just so silly. It's like, what? Like, perfect example. And my girlfriend hates this, but we've been together 8 years. For 2 years, I could not tell her friends what I did.
Oh, wow.
Right. Well, then everybody's like, well, why did you stay with her? It's a long story. And I lived by myself at that time, so I didn't really care. So we didn't live together at the time. So we now live together. But now the evolution. So to answer your question, it was very difficult. I was taking a step out. I've basically been ostracized by the nursing home industry because of what I do. And I don't care anymore, because I'm at the age where I'm 40. What am I, 47? 47 now. And I just don't care. To me, we need to move forward and use the knowledge to make this better. And what I found is I was in the position to where I knew this stigma would go away. And I knew if I started when I did, late 2013, I knew I had to start then, because I knew this is going to be massive. And I'm doing things now that I never thought I would ever. Negotiating deals with governments on hemp and CBD and cannabis. That's just crazy talk, but it's just so fun, because wherever you go and whatever you do in this industry, the plant is what connects everybody. And if you keep that in mind and look at that, I mean, I'm meeting people from all over the world I never would have crossed paths with unless it was for the plant. I learned on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, you need to get on LinkedIn. Right now, the cannabis and CBD and hemp market, the number one social media platform is LinkedIn, period, bar none. You're going to learn so much. Everybody's on there. And also from the European flair, 60 to 70% people on LinkedIn are on LinkedIn outside the United States. That's a lot of people. So a lot of people overseas use LinkedIn. Right. People think it's so complicated to deal with people overseas. It's not. WhatsApp, FaceTime audio, all this stuff's free now. Zoom. There's no excuse to sit there. There's no added cost. It's just figuring out time zones. Like for me, I do all my European stuff in the morning. Yep. I do USA in the midday, and I do Asia at night, because it's their next day. You're dealing with New Zealand, and it's 19 hours ahead. So I call them at 6 o'clock at night. It's like noon there the next day. It just takes a while to get used to, but it's cool.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's great that we have such it's like a lot of things converging to make it the right time for this to happen.
Right. You're not going to find
technology.
Jason, it's everything. So that's why you're not going to find another time. And if everybody's like, well, I wish I would have known, I'm calling everybody out. This is the time. If you want to get in, you need to do it now. Okay. So don't sell. Nobody ever told you. So I'm telling you right now. So you need to get involved. And so if you don't know how or where or why, that's okay. I didn't know either. And so now I know exactly where I'm going because it took me 6.5 years to get there. But now you don't have to go through the things that like I went through and others. There's avenues for you to get into this business. And if you're listening to this and you want to get into this business and you don't know how, start by what you're good at. Don't look at the business. Look at what you're good at. Are you good at being compliant? Are you good at educating people? Are you good at leading a team? Are you good at HR? Then start going to shows in the States and start figuring out what do they need. Because half the time, how are you going to know where you fit unless you know how the system works? And the number one recommendation, people say, what do I need to do to get into the business? I say, read the law. Whatever state you're in, if you want to go in the hemp business, read the state law hemp. Then read the Farm Bill 2018. You want to go into medical cannabis in Iowa, read the Iowa medical cannabis law. They're only 60 to 80 pages. Find out what the system demands. For example, if I'm an IT guru and I'm into blockchain or I'm into crypto, well, if I read that law and it says you have to have a certain amount of payment and a certain amount of time or a certain amount of tracking for computers or whatever, well, then there's an opportunity for me to bring value. So you really have to understand what kind of value do you provide, and then you need to understand where the industry is and understand what they need to be able to provide it. Because what I see a lot is a lot of our clients, they come to us and and I love them, but some of them don't know what they're doing. They literally don't know what direction they're going in. And I said, you know what? It's okay. You don't have to figure it all out right now. That's where you got us. So we work with groups who are bringing a lot of money to the table, and they're getting hot on like, isolate's going to be big. Isolate's going to be big, and we need to pump all this money into isolate. And I'm like, okay, I'm not a chemist, but I can tell you now the market's going to change in 2 to 3 years. So if you're going to invest $50 million in isolate materials and only do an isolate, what happens if full spectrum comes big? Or what happens when some new technique comes along and you invested all this money? So it's just giving perspective and helping them lead. Because our goal is to help them see the forest through the trees. Because I've got these people who will do the multi-level marketing, the Canaways and the CTFOs, and I have nothing against that. It's just not my thing. But they'll contact me and be like, oh, I'm selling my new line. It's great. It's awesome. I was like, oh, okay. How long you been doing this? 2 weeks. It's like, really?
I just started.
Right. So I get the enthusiasm, but another suggestion I would make very strongly is you got to read, and you got to read some more, and you got to read some more. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's Michael Patterson, U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. Just send over a like, and I usually bring on as many people as I can, because once you get on there and you see how much I post and all the stuff I post about, it's all rules, laws, trends, different things happening in the industry. And most people get on there like, wow, there's a lot of stuff. I'm like, I know. And it's every single day this market changes. So I remember doing a call with a financial firm, and that morning something huge happened in the market. And they said, can you tell us, what's going on in the market and how current it is? And I was like, well, as of this morning, this happened here. Yesterday, this happened. Yesterday, that happened. And so also I find the more you read and the more you understand and the more you learn, the better you feel, and you're not as fearful. Because I've learned this, like, let me give you a perfect example. So I was dealing with a guy in a state, I won't tell you where, and he comes to us and says, hey, we're going to apply for a medical marijuana license. I'm like, okay, great. Can we have a call next week? I'm like, yeah. So I printed off the law and read the law. It took me 30 minutes. Okay. I get on the phone the next day, and the guy sends me his pitch deck, which, if you don't know, is just like a PowerPoint presentation to pitch your investment. And he had 4 slides on there, and they were horrible. And then he proceeds to tell me that he's going to build a building in this city, this very large city, and be able to be up and operational in 2 years. And I'm like, well, that's great. But obviously he didn't read the law, because the law said you had to be up and operational in 8 months. So he didn't even read the law, and he was pitching me a deal that he knew nothing about, and he had no concept of it because he never even read the law. So when you get into the business, if you go to these conferences, read ahead of time and have a little bit of base of knowledge on what you're getting into. because you got a lot of charlatans and people who are full of crap out there, and they'll try to tell you they know everything and I know this and I know that. And most of the times, I would say about probably 60-50% of the time, they don't know what they know. They have a very limited knowledge of a certain state and a certain place, and that's okay. That's going to be they've more specialized in, say, California or Ohio or Illinois, and you need that. When people say, there's a whole debate online about calling people experts and non-experts, and so my thing is, I just know a lot of stuff about this industry because all I do is this. This is what I do every single day. Of the week and nights and weekends, just because I love it. I love doing this. And I see this industry really helping our planet and really moving things forward. And so if you're really passionate about something like this, start looking into it now. So when you need to make a transition, you can do it. Like for me, it took me 5 years to transition full-time into cannabis. It took me that long. I had to work other jobs. I was working 3 or 4 jobs at one time until I could get enough to where I could sit there and do this full time. And so now we've been full time for multiple years. We've got a good staff, got moving good. And it's still always stressing about making sure you meet your margins, making sure you meet your quotas and all that type of stuff, because we got to make sure that we can grow with our customers and our clients, because the business is growing and we got to be there to help them. So look at how you can provide value, look at what's important to you, and look at how you can sit there and make other people's lives better. Then the money will follow.
Those are wise words. Do you you mentioned reading, and obviously the laws are foundational. You got to know what you're dealing with, what you can do and what you can't do. Do you, before I ask this question, do you also seem to have some good mental models for operating in this industry, which is, it's not for the faint of heart. Do you have any other maybe books or resources that you read or listen to that are not specifically about cannabis? Like, just curious about sort of forming your mindset to operate in this industry.
One of the things I recommend is it's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. If you don't know of him, he's a big social media guy.
Yeah. Gary V.
Gary V. And so if you don't know, just Google Gary V or YouTube Gary V, and you'll see what I'm talking about. He's about my age. He really speaks of substance in your life. He really speaks about vision and focusing on providing that value, because we can do a podcast or we can put up social media stuff, but there's no content. There's no feeling or emotion behind it, and nobody's really going to look at it. And there's another book. There's a book I like called Good to Great. If you're younger, you probably don't know this book. It's a guy by Jim Collins. Yep. See? And so what I find is Jim is that book. I've read it when it came out years ago, and I always kind of refer back to that book of why it's important to look at your whole industry. Also, what I recommend is start looking for partnerships. If you've never run a company and you're expecting to run a 200 or 300 person company, you're going to have people on your team who've run a company. Also, I recommend putting your ego at the door, because you're going to end up hurting yourself. Because if you think you can do it all and you're not going to allow anybody else into your little world, and you're going to keep 100% of your company, or if that's what you want to do, and not bring other wise people in, then you're probably going to fail, or you're going to miss something. Because nowadays with technology, things are going to move so fast that you have to bring in a team. And I talk about the Ocean's 11 effect a lot. The movie Ocean's 11, where, they brought all these individuals together to rob a bank. I'm not talking about robbing a bank, but people who are masters in their skill set to bring together to accomplish amazing things in a short amount of time. Because those are the types of companies that are more profitable, the ones that can move quicker, and the ones that'll be a better takeover target. So if your goal is to sell out one day, you have to put in great people who can put in great systems. And then that way you're going to be more valuable as a company.
Yeah. It's still, even though there are a lot of opportunities, it's still about people.
It is.
Like you're saying, you can't just do it on your own. Let's see, Michael, I think that's probably a good place to start wrapping up. Do you have any message or question or call to action that you want to leave people with, something that you want people to remember?
The biggest thing is you got to follow your inner gut. You got to follow what you're sitting there. And if you're going to the same job like I was over and over and over, and not feeling like you were doing the thing you were supposed to do, you need to go listen to that voice, because life is short. I mean, I started getting into this, what am I, 47? Like at 40. People's like, oh, that's late, but we're going to live hopefully 100 years. And so the biggest thing I said, when I finally got past the point of being scared to fail, then I was ready to move forward. If some of you have been in that position where you're just scared to fail, well, you're going to fail. Okay. It's going to be harder than you ever thought you could, but do you want to live your life the way you're living it if you're not happy? And so I kind of got to that point in my life to where I just wasn't happy. I wasn't being fulfilled. I knew I could do more. And so I started to listen to that voice, and I'm so glad I did, of all that heartache that I had all those years. And nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody understands what you're going through. But if you know you're listening to your gut, and then you have to commit to it, you have to sit there and get up and go do your stuff and not procrastinate, because success is about you doing what you need to do to make yourself better. And so, for me, I've been lucky enough to do a lot of different types of things and manage a lot of people. And at some point in my life, I made a lot of money, and a lot of other points in my life, I didn't make any money. And so you really have to take the money out of it, and you have to follow your heart. And once you start doing that, then you start educating yourself, and you got to educate yourself about the business. But life is too short to be miserable, and you don't want to pass that on to your children to say, I stayed in a job because it was safe and reliable. And so the story I like to lead people is with Jim Carrey. And Jim Carrey is a comedian. If you don't know him, he's been on a lot of different things. And so his dad, he grew up in Canada. His dad was an accountant, but his dad always wanted to be a comedian. Well, he never had the guts to do it because he wanted to play it safe. Well, being an accountant, he got fired and lost his job. And so his whole life was put into turmoil. And so what Jim learned at a young age is just because you play it safe doesn't mean you're going to succeed. So if you don't know if you're going to succeed or not, go for the fences, because that way, at least you got the best shot in doing what you love.
That's a great place to leave people with. Michael, how can people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. So look at me, just put in search Michael Patterson, U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. And I'd love to bring you on my team and kind of look at all the knowledge. And if I can help you, let me know.
Fantastic. Michael, I learned quite a bit. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your insights. It's something that I'll definitely be poring over my notes for a few times over the next few days. And I sincerely just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. And guys, thanks for listening. It was fun.
Hey guys, and before you go, this is Jason from Spectrum Labs. Please be sure to visit us on the web at thespectrumlabs.com for any show notes and links discussed in the podcast. Also, remember to click the subscribe button wherever you may be listening from so you get notified when our next episode comes out. And tune in next show and have a fantastic day.